Hello and welcome to today's episode, in which I show you how to make 3 different dishes using soba noodles. This is going to be a slightly different style of video because, as you can see here, my microphone wasn't plugged in and I didn't realise until the eating part. After having a mini breakdown, I sat and cut all the footage so I could figure out what I had was anything salvageable, and thought I'll do a voiceover, try and fix it that way. No idea what happened, but it sounded awful and I'm a bit too fried, my brain's not functioning, and my audio technical skills aren't brilliant, so I didn't know how to fix it. So instead of defenestrating my computer, I just walked away from it and made coffee cake instead. The other night I was suddenly reminded of the vegan kedgeree video that I did a couple of years ago. I had some sort of issue, it was either microphone or I'd lost the footage completely. So I kind of did a piece to camera where I talked through everything I did and then cut the close-up footage in with that. So I thought that might be a good fix for the soba noodle video, because I spent 3 hours filming that and I didn't really want to waste all of that time. I haven't got the energy to redo everything. So fingers crossed, third time lucky. I'm going to show you how to make a deliciously easy tofu and vegetable ramen. We'll make a zingy and vibrant hot and sour noodle salad. And then we'll do a very easy sticky soy, broccoli and tofu dish. And we'll also make some quick pickled cucumbers. Initially I thought I'd have to sit and listen to the awful voiceover and make some notes so I could make sure I covered every point. But then I remembered the software that I use for editing, I use DaVinci Resolve, has a function where you can do closed captions in the video itself. Sat and watched a YouTube tutorial on how to get that working. And at the end of that tutorial, he also shows it's got an auto transcription feature, which I'd never even seen before. All you do is click a button, it analyzes the video and then spits out a load of text, which you can then download into a text file. I then pulled it into Google document. And I tell you what, it's better than YouTube's auto transcription. Like, it's amazing. If you haven't come across soba noodles before, they're a Japanese noodle, typically made with buckwheat and some wheat. Soba is the Japanese word for buckwheat, and buckwheat noodles are called sobakiri, kiri meaning sliced. The first known specific reference to sobakiri comes from a record from 1574 kept at the Joshoji temple, which documents that sobakiri was served to workers repairing the main hall of the temple. So there's a lovely amount of history going back on these tasty noodles. If you'd like lots more plant-based recipes, food factoids, and how not to film cooking videos, like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you tap the bell icon, you'll get an alert as soon as a new one's published. If you'd like to give the channel a bit of extra support and get access to some extra bonus content, I'll leave the link down to my Patreon down in the description for you. Having that extra bit of financial support really does help me produce these videos, and having a community of people like these folks is a really nice thing to have in my corner when life chucks me yet another curveball. The first step I wanted to get done and out of the way was make the pickled cucumbers, just so they'd have lots of time to absorb the flavours and do their thing. I use the mandolin to cut the cucumbers. It means I can get consistently thin slices with minimal effort. The thing I like about this one as well is it was cheap, because a proper mandolin will set you back hundreds. But it's also got this little post there, so you can adjust that and it raises and lowers the flaps. You can get quite thick slices or fairly thin slices. For uses like this, I tend to go for a thinner slice because the pickling liquid can penetrate deeper faster. Whereas if you go for a thicker slice, it's just going to take longer for the pickling liquid to do its magic. If you haven't got a mandolin, you can do it in the food processor if you've got a slicing blade, or on a grater that's got a slicing edge on it, or do it by hand. I made the pickling liquid directly in a bowl. I added half a teaspoon of chili flakes, a pinch of salt, perhaps a quarter teaspoon or so. I went for white rice vinegar in mine. It's a nice and light vinegar. It's not too punchy like a malt vinegar that you'd put on chips, that kind of thing. Could also use apple cider vinegar, white wine vinegar, that sort of thing. I did about 4 tablespoons of that, mixed everything together thoroughly to get the salt nice and dissolved. This is the thickness of cucumber I went for. I tried to do it a bit thinner, but it just became a bit problematic and they weren't coming out nice and evenly, so I just did it a bit thicker. I sliced up about 2/3 of an English cucumber, the long ones, dropped the slices into the pickling liquid and then went in with my hands to kind of massage and rub things together. Then I decided I wanted some Szechuan peppercorns in there as well. Szechuan pepper has got that pepper kick, but there's also like a lemony citrus kind of note to them as well. If you use too much, it will make your tongue go numb. So just be a little bit mindful of that. It doesn't hurt necessarily, but it's noticeable. So I did a good pinch, probably 1/4 teaspoon or so of the Szechuan pepper, just put that into the bowl, massaged everything together again, and then left it to the side. It was then time to cook off the noodles. Because I was doing 3 different dishes and wanted plenty of leftovers, I did a massive quantity of noodles. I think I did about 950 grams in total. No need for you to be doing that amount unless you're feeding a large amount of people. But you do need to cook your noodles in a pan that's big comparative to the amount of noodles that you're doing. They'll come in little portions. If you're only doing one, for example, a smaller pan will work, but I went for my big pasta pan because you need them to move around and not stick together because they are very starchy, so they have a tendency to clump. So just do it in a big pot with some salt in the water as well. With certain types of noodles, for example the soba and udon noodles, they'll come with a paper band around them to keep the portions portioned. So obviously take the paper off before you put them in water. I know you're thinking, well obviously Rachel, but you'd be surprised what you see on the internet these days. Bring your water up to a rolling boil, so you've got kind of vigorous bubbles on the top of the surface. Drop the noodles in, and then I took a fork and very gently wiggled the fork in between the noodles just to try and separate them. And I did that a few times during the cooking process. I had 2 packets of noodles from different brands. One packet said cook them for 3 to 4 minutes, the other one said 4 to 5. So I'd put the longer ones in first, waited a minute, put the other ones in. I don't think there was any need to. They did end up cooking unevenly. It's the same kind of thing as pasta, so put the noodles in and look at whatever the packet says. If the packet says 4 to 5, maybe try them at 3. And then if there's still chalkiness inside, do it another minute and then just keep trying it until they're nice and tender. As soon as the noodles were done, I poured everything into a strainer and then ran cold water over it. That washes off the excess starch but also stops the cooking process so they don't go any soggier. Of the 3 dishes, I did the hot and sour salad first because that was going to be served cold. So it meant one less thing that I'd have to frantically keep to temperature and do while I was doing the other 2 as well. This salad will also work with other noodle types. So for example, udon, which are quite a sort of fat, bouncy type noodle, and a vermicelli type. This type of noodle, you may think it's made out of rice. It's not. It's made out of mung bean starch. You can also get rice vermicelli that looks exactly the same. Looking on the packet here, it says to add dry vermicelli to boiling water and boil it for 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, I just put it in a bowl and cover it with boiling water and then put a lid on and leave it, and it cooks. You might just need to ping it in the microwave or pour a kettle of boiling water over the top of it. But I really don't think there's any need to be boiling the noodles themselves. For the salad, I took a few leaves of Chinese leaf. In the States, I think this is called Napa cabbage. It's got a really nice crunchy texture to it and it keeps in the fridge for ages. I think I had this particular one in there for a good couple of months. It's not quite as crunchy as a white cabbage or a green cabbage, but then it's crunchier than an iceberg lettuce is, but it's got a really nice pleasing crunch. If you can't find this particular type of cabbage, feel free to use iceberg or even white cabbage and just shred it quite finely. I stacked the 4 leaves on top of each other, shredded them down as thin as I could be bothered going. I took 3 smallish carrots, gave them a very quick peel to get the outer skin off, and then I wanted quite fine shreds, so I used the julienne peeler. It works in the same way as a speed peeler, but then it also shreds it vertically at the same time. None of these quantities are hard and fast. If you want less, do less. If you want more, do more. I took 2 spring onions. You can use scallions, green onions, that kind of thing. Took off the outer layer because that can be a bit tough and unpleasant to eat sometimes. Cut them into thirds and then split the thirds down vertically just to get kind of nice long strips. If you're not that bothered about appearance, feel free to just cut them into little circular rounds, that kind of thing. That's fine. I took a bunch of flat leaf parsley and a bunch of coriander, perhaps 5 grams of each. Chopped them down nice and finely. I ended up with probably 2 tablespoons or so of the herbs. I put a red chilli into the salad. I don't know what kind of chilli it is. The packet just says red chilli. Split it in half, scrape the seeds out. Normally, if I'm cooking chilies, I'll put the seeds in as well. But if for a raw in a salad, I think the seeds can just be a bit unpleasant, quite bitter sometimes. So I just took those out. Stacked the 2 halves of the chili on top of each other and shredded those nice and finely. I put a yellow bell pepper in mine, again, just for some extra crunch and a bit of sweetness. Feel free to use orange or red. I'd maybe avoid green because it's got a bit of a bitter taste to it. That's just not as nice, I don't think, in salads. Cut it in half, pulled the top bit out, and then I used my knife to take the kind of white rib bits that you'll see. I think that's possibly the placenta. It can be a bit bitter sometimes, so I always just cut that out and then just did a very basic thin slice on those like a julienne. For the salad dressing, I just built the dressing on top of the veggies. I used some mirin for sweetness. Mirin is a rice wine, very similar to sake, but it's got a lower alcohol content and a much higher sugar content. I used some toasted sesame oil. You do want toasted sesame rather than not toasted. It's just got a much better flavour. My friend brings me this chili paste case back from Singapore whenever she goes back to visit her family. It's got like a lemon flavour in with the chili. There's quite a powerful, intense heat on this one. And there's also a little mild funkiness to it, like a fermented kind of funk to it. Use something like sriracha, Tabasco, whatever hot sauce you've got. You know, don't think, oh, I can't make it because I haven't got that one. Don't worry about it. Just any hot sauce. I used a very small amount of light soy sauce, just to add a tiny bit of salty flavour to it, but I didn't want too much umami in there. I wanted the flavours to be very vibrant and fresh and light. And you don't want to use too much because the soy can dominate the flavours. Squeezed in the juice from 2 limes. A little trick to get maximum juice out of citrus fruits is before you cut it, roll it on the counter using your hand. Just don't be too firm because you will splat the fruit everywhere and you don't want that. Mixed everything together in the bowl. I ended up having to double the quantity of dressing. I've given you the doubled amounts, but I could see there wasn't going to be enough dressing in there once I added the noodles, because you want to make sure everything's nice and coated. Then I added in a good few handfuls of the noodles, mixed everything together. I used a lifting motion with it, as if I was trying to separate the strands of noodles, picking everything up together and sort of laying it down to the sides, picking the middle up again, laying it back down. Don't just go in with a fork and start stirring it and beating it. You need to be somewhat gentle with soba noodles. They're not nearly as hardy as a pasta or a spaghetti would be. They do break apart quite easily. I then moved on to prepping the tofu for the sticky noodles and for the ramen dish. If you're in the UK, I use the tofu brand. I use the XL one, which is 450 grams. This brand of tofu comes pressed already, so you don't have to do a full press by wrapping it in like towel and putting weights on it, putting a tofu press, any of that. It comes in liquid in the bag just to stop it drying out, so I just wanted to press it a little bit, just pat it really, just to get the excess moisture off there, so that whatever I put on it would stick. I cut the block in half, 1/2 for the sticky soy, 1/2 for the ramen. For both dishes, I sliced it into thicker planks, blotted it on some paper towel, gave it a good kind of press down just to get the surface as dry as possible. It will depend on what size your block is, but I put the planks on top of each other, did 3 horizontal cuts, and then span it around and did 4 or 5 cuts in the other direction to give nice kind of chunky pieces. For the ramen tofu, I wanted to get a little bit more flavour on the outside, so I put everything in a bowl and then sprinkled on some of this Masala chicken flavour stock powder. It adds a nice bit of flavour and then also kind of takes it into a chicken direction. Not essential at all. Feel free to just use stock powder or even things like Chinese 5 spice, or just skip it all together. I was making the dishes in tandem because I didn't want to be moving the board in and out of shot constantly, so I just did all of the veg prep for the ramen and the sticky ones. So I just chopped all the veg for that in one go. For the sticky soy noodles, I took 7 spears of tender stem broccoli, chopped off the very ends because that can be a little bit tough and not so pleasant to eat. Chopped it down into mouth-sized pieces, put it into a microwave-safe tub, didn't completely shut the tub with a lid because otherwise it'll pop. I pinged it in the microwave for a minute, and what that does is it kind of blanches off the broccoli, so it par cooks it. You don't need to add water or anything in there. Blanching it before adding it into a stir fry, it just helps it cook through a bit more evenly, because I find otherwise the frilly bits on a broccoli can cook and burn before the stalk bit is cooked. I toasted some raw cashews in the air fryer to sprinkle on top of the salad. Gives a really nice bit of texture and a really nice flavour in there as well. You could use peanuts, anything like that. These were perhaps toasted a bit too much. Once they're toasted, cashews go really fragile, so you can just chop them down by pressing your knife onto it and they'll break apart, or just crush them in your fingers. For the ramen, I wanted to put some baby corn on there, and I thought it'd be nice to try and introduce some extra flavour by toasting them. I cut them into long quarters, so you've got lengthways, wedge sort of shapes. Sprinkled them with a bit of sunflower oil, put them in the air fryer. I use the preheat setting of my air fryer, which is 205C, which is going to be around 400 Fahrenheit, and that runs for 5 minutes. That temperature softens the corn slightly and then gives a really nice charred bits on the corners. I wanted plenty of vibrant flavours and lots of crunchy textures to put on the top of the ramen. I took another 3 small carrots and peeled off the outer layer, just because the outer part of a carrot can just be a bit too intense sometimes. And then I used that peeler to shave off long ribbons. This is pak choi. It's an Asian vegetable. The texture is very crunchy, but also really light. Lighter even than the Chinese leaf, but very, very crunchy, very crisp. And even once it's cooked and hot, it still maintains a bit of that crunch, which is just lovely. Shredded one of those down, green part and white part. When I built the ramen in the bowl, I put the pak choi at the bottom, put the noodles on top of that, and then the broth on top of that. It means the pak choi is in contact longer with the hot broth, so it starts cooking a little bit and softening a tiny bit. Doesn't matter if you don't do it that exact way, it's just how I like to do it. Often with a ramen you'll get a boiled egg on the side of it. Obviously that wouldn't be vegan, so I went with avocado. I initially considered using some of this Oggs vegan egg substitute. It'd be like Just Egg in the States, that kind of thing. Ultimately, for the sake of speed and not having to faff around cooking off different things, I just went with an avocado. But if you wanted to use this, what I would do is get a plate like as flat as possible but with a slight rim. Pour your Oggs on, maybe even in strips, because that way it will cook faster because you've got more surface area for the heat to get into. A bit like I did for the pancake breakfast sandwich, that's how I did the egg layer. I cut my avocado hemispherically, so you're going around the widest part, twisted it apart, and then to take the stone out, very carefully tap it with the blade on your knife. There really is no need to be slamming a massive knife into an avocado to get the stone out, okay? Because you can really easily slip off and it will go straight through your hand if your knife is sharp, the way it's supposed to be. I then carefully peeled the skin back and then cut that into vertical slices. You could even go in with a teaspoon or even a melon baller if you've got one of those in your drawer that you never use. I keep this jar of shiitake mushrooms in the cupboard. I think they're a Chinese mushroom. When I was in the supermarket buying ingredients, I picked up a packet of mushrooms and then thought, well, maybe I'll use the shiitake because then I can use the liquid, the soaking liquid, use that in the ramen broth. Put 4 of them in a bowl, covered them with boiling water, and then just left it for, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours maybe. And then to slice them, all I did was kind of gently squeeze out some of the excess liquid and then just slice them down. I then moved on to making the broth for the ramen. Do feel free to use like the chicken flavour, or Mas will even do a beef flavour stock powder, or you could buy a pre-made broth, a bit like this Itsu one that I've got. You know, that's a nice little shortcut for you. A few nights before making that video, I was really in the mood for a ramen, so I just pulled things out the cupboard and chucked it in a pot, and it worked out really nicely. So I thought, oh well, make that one and show you how to do it, because everything's kept in the pantry, so it doesn't rely on you keeping fresh stock or having very specific types of stock powders or what have you. I did a tablespoon of this Superior Dark soy sauce. I don't find the flavour of this type any saltier than a standard soy sauce, like a dark soy sauce, but it is much richer and deeper in flavour. Then I added 4 or 5 tablespoons of light soy sauce. I added some Shaoxing rice wine. It's like a cooking condiment, like a fermented rice wine. You could use sherry or vermouth. I did a squirt of sriracha, maybe a teaspoon. Again, feel free to use whatever hot sauce you've got. I did a small drop, perhaps 1/4 teaspoon, 1/2 teaspoon or so of golden syrup. And then I topped that off with 2 cups of water, which is around 480 mils. Nothing needs to be exact here. And then I remembered I'd meant to add some Chinese 5 spice. This has got things like star anise, cloves, and I think this one's got some garlic and onion powder in there. Gives a really nice round flavour for very little effort. Covered the pot with a lid and then just put it on a very low simmer, just so it could be infusing slowly while I finished up the rest of the cooking. For the sticky soy tofu, I fried that off separately in the pan because it's really difficult, if not impossible, to get an even bit of colour and texture on the outside while you've got wet things in there like veggies. So I always just do it separately. It just makes your life much easier. You could also do it in the air fryer. In my saute pan, I heated up way too much sunflower oil, chucked in the other half of the block of tofu, fried that off until pretty much every side had a nice golden bit of colour to it. In this little dish here, this is a mixture of pectin and cold water. I bought the pectin ages ago because I got some gummy sweets that were made with pectin, and they had a really nice mouthfeel that was very gelatin-like. If you didn't know, gelatin is made by boiling animal bones and skin. It's like collagen. That's where gelatin comes from. So it's not vegan, it's not even vegetarian. So if you've ever seen a packet of Haribo, for example, that says halal, it's because they've used halal animal products, and it can't have any pork in there, no pig or anything like that. I wondered if I could get some of that pectin mouthfeel, if I could use that to kind of replicate a bone broth consistency, but more on that in a minute. Once the tofu had coloured evenly-ish, took it out the pan and put it on a separate plate. Wiped out the pan to get rid of any little fragments of tofu, because that will burn if it's still cooking in the pan, and partly to get any remaining oil out. This is the air fryer tofu here. That's the one that I put the chicken flavour stock powder on. So you can see the texture goes lovely and bouncy with a really nice amount of colour on there. To make the sticky soy sauce, I took the pan off the heat, because if I'd have left it on the stove, even if the stove was off, the hob is still hot, and I didn't want it evaporating quicker than I could build the sauce. I did 2 tablespoons of the light soy sauce and added about a teaspoon or so of the superior dark soy sauce, just to boost up the flavour a bit. And I grated in half a teaspoon of fresh ginger. I grated the ginger using a coarse microplane. Doing it on that is just a really nice way of getting very small bits that aren't going to affect, the mouthfeel of the dish. This is vegan gochujang paste. It's a Korean chili paste that's got lots of other nice flavours in there along with the chili. I've had this tub in the fridge for at least a year, so it keeps really well. It's a nice one to keep hold of. Standard gochujang has got fish in it, so either shrimp or anchovy, so just be very careful about that if you're making it for a vegan or if you're vegan. Added a spoonful of the gochujang into the sauce. I did a squirt of golden syrup, probably a teaspoon thereabouts. Then I did a couple of tablespoons of boiling water just to kind of bulk it out. I didn't want all of the liquid coming from soy sauce because it would make it very powerful, almost too powerful. Here I am trying to add in that pectin into the hot water. If you've ever had a bone broth, like if you've had a roast chicken and boiled the carcass in water afterwards, it's got like this silky kind of mouthfeel to it. The feel of it in your mouth is more than just hot water. It's kind of tricky to explain, but that's what I was hoping to achieve by adding the pectin. Other gelling agents that I've used, like agar, carrageenan and that kind of thing, they don't start swelling to that degree until you heat them up. But as soon as the pectin came in contact with the water, it gelled, so it made it very difficult to mix it like consistently. I did worry that it was going to be really lumpy going into the broth, and I thought I might have to just fish them out. But it seemed to melt in really nicely once they'd been in contact with the hot water. If you decide to give it a go yourself, just allow 15 minutes or so at a, kind of medium-high simmer. And if the lumps still aren't out at that point, fish them out. But I think you should be all right, they'll just melt. I'll definitely try the technique again in the future. I just got a bit overwhelmed, a bit tired, so I couldn't spend more time adding more and more stuff into it to get it to work. When I had the leftovers the next day, in the pot the liquid did look a little bit thicker than it would if just being, the stuff that I put in there. And then I'll update the pinned comment when I try it so I can let you know the quantities, that kind of thing. Also added a couple of tablespoons of the soaking liquid from the mushrooms just to give it an extra kick of flavour. Back to the sticky sauce, I thickened it up with a bit of cornstarch slurry. I took like a tablespoon of cold water and sprinkled on about a teaspoon or so of cornstarch and mix it together. If you try and mix cornstarch powder straight into a hot liquid, it's going to gel immediately and you won't be able to get the lumps back out again. So doing the slurry helps you mix it through much easier. The consistency I wanted for the sauce was to lightly coat a spoon. So if you dip a spoon and if it coats a spoon, you're ready to go. If you want a sauce that's really sticky in consistency, just chuck in loads more syrup and maybe a bit more soy sauce and that kind of thing. I'm just not such a fan of overly sweet stuff in savoury dishes, which is why I opted for adding the cornstarch thickener. I put the cooked broccoli back in again, just to mix everything together and bring the broccoli back up to temperature, and then added in the fried tofu. Again, mix it together to bring the tofu back up to temperature, and then added a few handfuls of the noodles. I used some tongs to mix the noodles, and I used that same sort of lifting technique, so picking up the middle of the noodles and moving it and spreading it apart, and then constantly going from the bottom and pulling it upwards, just so you don't break the noodles apart completely. From this point, switched all of my cameras off, plated up my 3 dishes, took pictures, switched the cameras back on, and realised that the microphone hadn't been plugged in properly. So fingers crossed, all being well, I'm going to hand you over to past me. So we've got the ramen there, so I've loaded up the bowl, the little salad there, and then we've got the sticky noodles and tofu. One of my lights has died, my other one's about to go, and I've just realised my microphone I don't think has been plugged in this entire time. So here's the sticky noodles. I've had to sack off the chopsticks. I'm shaking too much to use them, so fork it is. I'm so angry with myself. Dive in. Sticky, sweetish a little bit, but lots of umami. The noodles have got that nice nuttiness going on, and there's a slight bit of texture on the noodles as well, which is really good. Spear up some of that pickled cucumber. Get some of the salad. I was trying to keep things compact for the thumbnail, but it doesn't make for the easiest of eating. Go for it. That's lovely and refreshing. Even though we put that tiny bit of soy in, it's still very refreshing and light. That's going to be great for like spring, summer type eating. Because it'll make a nice work lunch, that one, because it's not too heavy. And the ramen, I'm going to try just the broth on its own. Yeah, those flavours are amazing. It's very potent. Like the 5 spice, the soy, all the other bits are put in there, but it's not overpowering, it's not too punchy. Doing all 3 of them together, it was a fair amount of work because there's a lot of veg prep involved. If you're just doing one of them midweek, easily do that in half an hour, not a problem at all. Put your noodles on first, then start prepping your veg. Maybe get your broth on after the noodles are on, if you're doing the ramen. Very easy. And it'll keep reasonably well for leftovers. I wouldn't freeze soba noodles because I think they're going to go really mushy. Another great thing to do with soba noodles is to kind of cook them risotto style. I'll link to the teriyaki noodles that I did. So if you've ever made assassin spaghetti, it's the same process as that. You put everything in a frying pan and then add ladlefuls of a broth or whatever, and then it cooks them that way. It's really tasty. Yeah, so I'll link to both of those videos down in the description for you. For more delicious fast and plant-based midweek recipes, like this video and then subscribe to the channel. If you want to be alerted as soon as anyone's published each week, just tap that little bell icon. While you're waiting for the next one, check out this.